Morning, group. This particular brief presentation lecture is going to be dealing with the issue of two concepts, two big driving forces of the Middle Ages. You've looked at the church already, and both of these have been mentioned previously, and you've watched a video, and you've done some reading now on feudalism, and also that concept of manorialism. So between feudalism and manorialism, each of which went hand in glove with each other, it helped to explain how the European world was brought back from the brink of total elimination, and it also illustrates how power was reorganized in this new world of Europe between 500, if you remember, 500 AD up to about 1500. So let's get you started here. The whole concept of feudalism and manorialism really doesn't start to kick in until you get to the time of Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire, about 700 AD approximately. Now, I'm going to try to distinguish between feudalism and manorialism. I trust for manorialism, you'll understand that this is an economic component, whereas feudalism is mainly a political, military, social relationship, and each crossover in terms of having elements in the field of the other. So let's start with feudalism. Feudalism, and you might want to refer to that hard copy that Ms. Lovingood will give you, and if you follow along each of the two diagrams on feudalism and manorialism, I don't know why I'm having trouble with manorialism this morning. I think it's a little early, but if you follow along with each of those diagrams, it'll help you to understand as you take notes how they shake out and how they are a symbiotic relationship. You have to have one to have the other. So feudalism, that whole concept is based on land grants, on loyalty, and then on trading services. We refer to that in economic terminology as payment in kinds, trading services. So in terms of this, you need to understand each was a closed system. It was an organization that was self-sufficient, that was self-perpetuating, and that was there by and large to retain the status quo and not to look at new ways of doing things, new ideas, new leaders with different sets of skills. It was there to protect society as it was at that moment in time. And that's a big factor in terms of where the Middle Ages will head, with the high and the late. That period approximately of about 1200 to 1500. So as you know, the land was power, because land, you needed food and you needed armies during this time, and both for armies and food you needed a lot of bodies, and those bodies were tied to the land. So when you had land, you had the people who happened to live on that land, and those would be the foundation of your relationships as the nobility and their relationship to these new emerging monarchs that we'll talk about in the next couple of days. So the serfs, the 90% of the people, they did all the work again, and that's always was the case, where power was not shared with these lower groups, as it was perhaps in ancient Greece and in the Roman Republic somewhat. Rather, this was a system that, we'll talk about this in a little bit, of enslaving people. And as a serf, a peasant, you were tied to the land. You didn't have the right to move without the permission of that individual who held the land at the moment. And you only held the land provided that you were loyal to the person above you. So the vassals, this network of knights and barons and earls, all these people, and the relationship to the person above them, they were always somebody else's vassal till you get to the top, to the king. And of course, alongside the king, as you know, was the church. And that was, again, that symbiotic relationship, the divine right to rule. A king had the right to rule because the Pope had blessed them and given them, in short, God's permission to rule. So everyone was a vassal to somebody else above them. And loyalty is above all else the way you held on to your land, which gave you, again, the men to fight the wars, the battles, and to grow the crops that would fuel your armies and the people necessary for that. As you also know, in terms of a closed system, this whole idea of primogeniture, the idea of passing along all the wealth of a given family to the oldest son. So it was always a system where there were very, very few people who were inside this circle who were able to acquire and to taste power. So that was a very small percentage of people with, again, that use of primogeniture. And it also kept land within the church. And as you know, the church had vast holdings of land and hence great wealth. It was really the wealthiest organization of the time period of the Middle Ages. So in terms of, as you look at that diagram on feudalism, you can see this interlocking system that was in many ways designed to be small, designed to be tightly knit because it's easier to control a limited number of people. And the rules to the road, the guidelines were pretty well understood. Now the lines were fluid where one vassal, one noble might end up shifting their loyalty or selling their services to the highest bidder. But it was one of those that the change that came about was basically on a grant of land, who was going to get the land, and that land again was tied to one's loyalty to the person above. You're willing to go do battle for them, and their ability to grow the crops that would need. And then also oftentimes they would be subject to paying taxes to the person above them. And again, that fueled and people at the top accrued the greatest wealth, the greatest power, the most land. Now we're going to shift over, if you look at the diagram on manorialism. And manorialism is more of an economic model because with the exit of the Roman Empire and all the infrastructure that was necessary, the shipping networks, in particular the roads, the means of communication, however crude they were, all of that was gone. And so with trade diminished and absent from the European continent, society had to find a way to economically stay together. It wasn't a great deal of growth, but the key was manorialism provided this payment in kinds of exchanging services for things you needed, other services. Talent, if you'll look on that, here, let's go back. If you look at that system, you'll notice that one of the things that is conspicuously absent from both of these diagrams, and something that we would naturally have within our economic models today, within our political systems, but particularly the former economic systems, is the merchant class. And the merchant class is going to be immensely important as we move forward, particularly in the period of the Renaissance, going during both the Hellenistic cultures, the Greeks and the Romans. You had a very vibrant merchant class, and that merchant class, in its many manifestations, not just shop owners, but people engaged in commerce and finance. That merchant class, without that, there's no way to move forward economically because they are the people that organize the instruments of supply and demand. And without that tool that the merchant class provided of banking and of marketing, selling, of getting goods to the people who wanted those, without that, you can't move ahead. And that will come, that merchant class will come, and then later, and this is key, be the foundation for a middle class, which will take hundreds of years to develop, but that will be the foundation of economic progress. So in the system here, you'll notice as you look at manorialism, you are basically looking at just, again, a rural society, an agrarian society. So there were developments agriculture during the period, but such as leaving a field fallow, crop rotation. There was some developments in terms of how one would plow their fields, but the key was there's not a lot of role for education in this particular society, because education is always looking at critical thinking, analysis. And in this society, in manorialism, you basically are expected to fulfill the position that you were given at birth. So if your father was let's say some type of skilled trades, a blacksmith, or someone who worked with metal, that would be your job. And so your position in life, your station in life, was always rigid. You didn't climb up. You couldn't marry into the classes above you. You couldn't think your way through education into that next step. You were always defined by where you were born and who you were born to. And you really, until we get into the formation of cities where peasants will begin to leave without permission, there is no reason to change the station of life of people. So the system fed the society. It provided, again, going back, it would provide those armies. But this was a system that was terribly inefficient, so talent was never able to rise to the top. Economics is all about efficiency, organizing your resources in such a way to achieve the maximum productivity, and good with those. But this society didn't allow that. So one did not grow and develop based on their merit, based on using and displaying their talents. And that would provide a system that would not go forward. And you might also add to this, like capital. There's no capital development, accumulation. And again, you have to have that to grow businesses, to produce industry, to invest in new ideas, new innovations. This was a society that concept was foreign to them in many respects. So as I look at closing this up here, I'm a little bit over time. I was hoping about 10 minutes, about 13 minutes at this point. I want to go back over what we had. So this symbiotic relationship of feudalism and manorialism supported each other. But it was only about 10%, so the 10%ers we all talk about in our society, the 1%ers acquiring greater and greater wealth, and that wealth gap growing. Well, the wealth gap was built in, it was cemented into the system by the use of these two political, social, and economic systems. And this will not be challenged until we get into the Renaissance, where you have kings wanting more power and then challenging the status quo of the church, where the nobility is beginning to demand more rights, where new ideas begin to emerge and to challenge the old systems and models. And that's always the case with change. And the whole concept of as the society was more stable, and it does become more stable as power accrues to a fewer and fewer people, and there's less and less war. But as that happens, there's a desire for progress. So with that said, group, and I'm sorry, I'm getting low on my battery here. I apologize. So we're gonna wrap this up, and there we go. I apologize, a little blank there, but we're gonna wrap this up for today. Tomorrow, I made mention that you'd get an opportunity to Q&A, so you're going to start some Q&A tomorrow, and I will answer those on Friday for you. That's it for today, so keep your questions in mind, and hopefully this will help you complete this writing that you'll have in the second part of today's work. Have a good day.